So it's May in Dorset, and the woods here around Milton Abbas are absolutely bursting with colour and spring growth. The light is flat and overcast, so it's quite good for a woodland shoot. But also I think this is a really good opportunity to address one of the issues that seems to permanently perplex landscape photographers: where to focus in the picture. In the past, I've looked at using hyperfocal distance tables to enable me to calculate what aperture I need and where my focus point should be to give me the depth of field I need for a landscape picture. But you know, out in the field or in the woods, that's how I hardly ever do it. Because really, when all is said and done, you can't beat trial and error. So Wendy and I came for a walk here last weekend. I was struck by just how beautifully verdant the woods are looking at the moment. I think this is my spot, somewhere around here. I'm looking to use a medium to longish lens perspective with the track leading into the frame. So the camera I'm using today is the Canon EOS R mirrorless camera, and you know, the way we focus and check depth of field has changed over the years because the technology's changed, and particularly with this new camera, the way I'm doing things is a bit different. So I'm using the new Lee filter holder system here. And because I'm shooting in a woodland, I want to use a polarizer. So I've composed my picture here. I'll just fine-tune my level using the spirit level there. What I need to do next is just make sure my camera's set up properly. Now I'm using the EOS R, but this will be the same for all cameras. The principle will remain the same if the menus are slightly different. What I need to do is activate depth of field preview. Now here in the menus of the camera, in this section of the menus, there's a button called, or a menu called Customize Buttons. And if I select that, what I need to do is select to activate depth of field preview and to assign it to one of the controls on the camera. So what I've done is I've chosen this button here, which is just on the front of the camera next to the shutter release, to be the button I use for depth of field preview. And if I go in there, you can see I've activated it for depth of field preview. So I'm going to need depth of field all the way from these plants in the bottom of the frame all the way to the furthest trees in the distance, and at a relatively longish focal length of 70mm. That means I'm going to have to be quite careful about where I focus and what aperture I use. So the next thing I'm going to do is set my aperture, and with most landscapes I tend to start by using a mid-range aperture, unless there's any reasons why I don't need to, such as I deliberately want minimal depth of field. I'm going to start with a mid-range aperture of f11 and then just work out whether that aperture is giving me the depth of field I need. Next, I need to focus the picture, and this is where we come to some difficult decisions. Where to start? Well, the rough rule of thumb saying a third into the picture usually works well, but what actually does that mean? I think in this case, if we take a line up from the bottom of the frame, you can see I've got the grid display on my camera here. So I've got the thirds, the picture area divided up into a third. So if I select a point of focus roughly on that bottom third, that's about a third into the frame. It's not a bad starting point, and you can see I've selected my focus just by touching the screen there, and now I've got back button focus activated. So if I just press AF on, that's focused on that point. The other option would be to do it focus manually, and of course what I can do is switch my lens to manual here. Can you see it's gone all yellow now, the display? That's because I've got manual focus peaking activated. And so basically then if I change my focus, you can see it's display. Can you see how that yellow shifts through the frame? That's for showing me where my plane of focus is. Now then, how do I determine whether I've got enough depth of field? Well, this is where the depth of field preview really comes in. So if I just press that button down, it stops the lens down and I can determine my depth of field. So if I do that just looking at the screen, I can't really determine that very well just looking at the screen as is. But if I look through the eyepiece, the electronic viewfinder, and stop down now, I get a better indication. And it looks pretty good, but I need to actually determine that much more accurately. So the next thing I do is actually zoom into my live view display. This is the button for zooming in, and I can then move around the picture area and determine depth of field. So now I've got it focused, I've got the little box set on my foreground there, zoom in even further, and now if I press my depth of field button, it shows me what's sharp and what isn't. And I'd say that looks pretty sharp. What about the foreground? Let's try that. Sorry, not the foreground, the distance. Choose another area of the frame. That's sharp. Come right back into the distant trees there. Again, press the depth of field preview. Now that is not sharp, is it? I haven't quite got enough depth of field. My foreground and middle distance is sharp, but the background isn't. I think I'm going to need to go down on my aperture. So I'm going to come down to f16 now and repeat the process. So zoom in again, look at the distant trees, depth of field preview. It looks better. What do you reckon, Gov?
It looks sharper.
Yeah. Is it not sharp enough?
Not quite sharp enough. Is there any, going to f16, is there any disadvantages to that?
Yeah, basically you don't want to go to a smaller aperture than you need because the lens isn't performing as well as it does at medium apertures. But a bigger consideration is depth of field. You use the right aperture to give you the depth of field you need. So we were just filming now with two tripods set up and a cyclist came herring around the track, almost smashed into both of us. But what I've done is reset up, and what I'm doing now is focusing further into the frame. I'm at aperture f16. You can see my focus point there. Let's just move it to there. AF on focus, and now I'm going to repeat the process of checking my depth of field. So what do? I enlarge the frame, move down to the bottom area of the frame here, those white jobbies there, I think. Press again to enlarge even further, press depth of field preview, and that's lovely and crisp. I can tell that immediately. Okay, now I'm just going to zoom back out, move the frame back up the top of the frame there to those trees in the distance there, enlarge again. Now I press my depth of field preview, and they're sharp too. So I'm pretty confident now that I've got the right aperture and the depth of field. But you know, trial and error is the way to do these things, and I'm now actually going to take a shot here. Just taken a still frame here, and the best way of checking depth of field is actually check your exposed picture. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. So check my picture, and I can just pinch it like that to enlarge it, and then move around the frame, and that foreground is beautifully sharp. And pinch back out again, come down, look at the detail in the distance as well. That's lovely and sharp too. So I've got the right focus point and I've got the right aperture. Okay, Gov, I think we got it. That worked well with that walker coming through.
Time for a cider.
Yeah.